Hey, it's James from 4x4 Earth, and welcome to track 41 of the 4x4 Earth podcast. All there is to know about diffs, lockers, and eLockers with Heath Moore from Harrop.
Join James from 4x4earth.com as he learns all there is to know about four-wheel driving, camping, fishing, and getting out and exploring our great country on the 4x4 Earth podcast.
Hello everyone, welcome back to the 4x4 Earth podcast. Super excited to be covering a topic today that I know is a topic that a lot of people come to 4x4 Earth looking for information on. So this is all about lockers and eLockers in particular. There are a lot of threads with a lot of views, tens of thousands of views, about the difference between air lockers and eLockers. So I thought what better to do than to get one of the experts in the industry, Heath Moore from Harrop, to talk about what an eLocker is, what makes it different, and how they work. So let's get into our interview with Heath. Hey Heath, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, James. Great to be on board.
So do you want to give us a little bit of an introduction about who you are and what you do?
Certainly. So I'm the General Manager at Harrop Engineering. I'm just coming up on 10 years with the business and probably 8 years in the role. And we're fairly diversified performance automotive brand, and I'm absolutely passionate about everything with wheels and engines. I grew up in the Hunter Valley, actually, and we had a family farm, so tractors and bikes and everything with an engine was highly appealing, and very fortunate to be helping lead the Harrop business, which has got such a rich history in Australian engineering and automotive more broadly.
Cool. So what sort of four-wheel drive do you have?
Well, currently I'm driving the Harrop Superado, which we launched earlier this year, which is a pretty cool rig. It's based on the Colorado platform from Holden, but we've applied our V8 prowess across other platforms, and we've grafted the LSA that HSV were using in the GDS models and a number of others into the Colorado and put our big 2650 Eaton base supercharger on top. So it's out with the 2.8 litre diesel, and it's a Colorado platform with a 600 horsepower supercharged V8 and transmission change to the 6L80, which is what's used in was used in the Commodores and Camaros. So it's a lot of fun to drive. It's got plenty of horsepower, obviously, and lots of torque, and makes all the right sounds, which is probably very appealing when you compare it to the little diesel that it's replaced.
Cool. It sounds like it's got a lot of power. So what mods have you done to it?
Well, obviously the powertrain is all upgraded. It still runs the rear factory diff because being a commercial vehicle, it's rated to handle the torque and the towing capacity. But as I said, it's got a 6-speed GM 6L80 transmission and the V8 supercharged engine. In terms of other accessories, we've worked with Shockworks, which is a Melbourne-based suspension company for a coilover package. We've retained the rear leaf springs, which is obviously required. But their technology is really great. They've got the valving set up extremely nice, and they're from an OEM background. So the suspension's with Shockworks. We're running method wheels. That's an 18x9, 285, Toyota's new Open Country RT tyre, which is sort of a hybrid between their all-terrain and their mud terrain, which has proven to be really great, both on-road and out on the track. We're running a Rhino rack on the roof. We've got an ultra-vision light bar, and our big brake kit we've just released as well. So we've replaced a pretty small front brake, and we're running a 14-inch or a 355mm rotor with a big Harrop 6-piston caliper in the front to improve the stopping power, because we've obviously given it a lot more go with the engine package, and the brakes need to be complementing that. So yeah, it's a great ute. The interior's been done up a little bit. We've put our own sort of bolstered leather, perforated leather seat trim on the interior, and some custom side steps which match the webbing that the Rhino rack's got on the roof. So it's a pretty tough looking rig, and certainly turns heads.
Cool. Does it get to go off-road much?
Yeah, it's done a number of media appearances. We've had it off doing getting content for videos, and my my sort of work schedule and home life, I don't get to do any real overnight or longer style trips. So we generally go out and do some day trips and take the opportunity to capture some media along the way. It's obviously got an eLocker in it as well, so our selectable locking diff, just to give it that extra capability off-road. But it's spent, a fair bit of time here getting various engineering works done on it throughout the year, and it's also been off doing some media activity as well.
So when you're off-road, mud, snow, sand or rock?
That's a tough one. I probably enjoy the diversity of a bit of everything, to be honest. I've lived in Melbourne for a bit over 10 years now, and in the Hunter Valley there's obviously no snow, but it's definitely on my bucket list to get into the high country during winter, which I haven't had an opportunity to do yet. I've had a number of invitations and I really need to take up one of those. But in terms of tracks, sand and rock, and I like it all really, but the more technical the better. I like getting the vehicle sort of crossed up and trying to sort of navigate a tricky section of track. So yeah, like Harrop, we're fairly diverse with our range of products and the sort of vehicles, and I think my four-wheel driving appetite's probably the same, like a diverse selection of terrain.
Yep. So what's the best track that you've ever done and why?
Purely from a recreational point of view, I don't think I've got a single track. I've certainly got out to the state forest locally, like Talangi and Wombat frequently, and in the Hunter Valley there's some amazing state forest tracks around the Barrington Tops and the Bulahdelah region, but I think the single best track that I've been on is the Think racetrack, which I did last year competing in the off-road event, which is just basically 220 k's of whoops and sand, and it's you're concentrating pretty hard trying to go as fast as you can. So I'd have to say Think's probably the best track that I've been on.
What was that like, doing the race?
Oh, it was exhilarating. It was a little bit, first time that I've done it, it was a little bit daunting, but you just had to sort of find a rhythm. The trophy trucks, are just flat out, and they're running down there in about an hour and 50 minutes, but the side-by-sides, they sort of sometimes refer to them as the golf buggies, that they take, around about the 3-hour mark to do the 220-odd K. So you're concentrating really hard, and there's no consistency with the whoops, and you're just trying to find a rhythm, and instead of being up on top of them like you can be with the big vehicles, the side-by-sides, you really need to be picking the lines and not over-driving them, because the CVs and the suspension arms, they're just not designed to be driven flat out over that kind of terrain. So I'd probably describe it, and I wasn't sure, we did it in the Yamaha YXZ. We didn't do a lot of testing. It was sort of its first race, and we probably drove the thing at 80% just to have a level of comfort that we could get the car down there. You camp at a really remote Aboriginal community, no mobile phone service, limited spares, and then turn around the next day and go back up the track. So we were faster the next day by about 20 minutes, but it's a case of preserving the vehicle more than anything when you're in a side by side. But it's an amazing event, like the locals, and it's the premier off-road racing event in the country, as many of your listeners would know, and it's just an absolute spectacle. It's brilliant.
Cool. What's the hairiest moment that you've ever had four-wheel driving, and what did you learn from it? Never
anything highly dangerous, but I do recall when I was in my early 20s, I had a Toyota 4Runner, and it had 35s on it, all terrains, and my brother's a few years younger than me. We went out for a bit of a play near where we lived, and it was one of those sort of areas underneath power lines that have various puddles and bog holes, and not really being very experienced in what we're doing off-road, we sort of, ploughed into one of these, big puddles without checking the depth and just basically came to a stop, and we got stuck there for quite a while, and we ended up getting snatched out by someone. But at the time, I was sort of pretty nervous that we were in some trouble in trying to recover the car, but we managed to get it out, but it was just a lesson in experience, I guess.
So tell us a little bit about your the history of Harrop. You've been there for a while. How long's Harrop been around for, and what is it that they do?
Well, the business was originally set up or established in 1955 by Len Harrop, and it was part of the Harrop family until 2008, but just actually coming up on the 10-year anniversary of new ownership with the Adrad Group. But Len Harrop started the business, and it was originally heavy haulage and textile. So the northern suburbs of Melbourne, it was a lot of clothing manufacturers and trucking-related transport companies. So it was an engineering firm that provided those levels of general services and expertise. And then it was Len's son, Ron, who joined the business in the 60s, and he had a huge passion for motorsport and ended up getting involved in drag racing, had a very famous FJ called the FJ. It was Harrop Howler. It was an FJ that ran sort of, amazing quarter mile times back in the day for what it was, using a 6-cylinder. And his reputation grew as being a go-to person for go-fast bits, and later got involved with circuit racing. And through those relationships and networks that the Harrop business started developing a lot of automotive-based product centered around racing, motorsport primarily, but then that also spread to street cars, and we had the OEM brake supply to HSV for a number of years, and brakes were across all of the touring cars back in the 70s and 80s, and through that, differentials were a big part of the business. So the Sierras back in the day had a Harrop developed Sierra 9-inch diff, and that's really where the business has grown from. So the business was acquired by the Adrad Group at the end of 2008, and our core products are really powertrain and driveline. Like that's our key competencies, and whether it's engine-related, transmission, differential, or braking, that's our expertise. So now we've got a really broad range of products using the world's best sort of technology, and focus very much on global vehicle platforms today, because as we know, there's no more Aussie manufactured vehicles like there was not so long ago with the Falcons and the Commodores, which was a huge part of the Harrop business. And now it's Toyota Tundras and all sorts of platforms that are like the Tundra is not even a vehicle that's sold here in Australia, but hugely popular in the US and the Middle East, which are key markets for us now.
And I reckon that there'd be a spot in the Australian market for the Tundra. It's kind of one of those questions. I've seen a couple that obviously have been imported, and they look pretty cool, and they go really well.
Oh, they're a fantastic truck. They are big, though. Like, I think in regional areas, or certainly out of the city, they'd be livable. But Harrop's in Preston, 10 k's north of the city in Melbourne, and I live not far from the city in the southeast, and even just parking a Tundra, like we've got a Ram 3500 Dually, which has been converted to right-hand drive to tow a fifth-wheel trailer for car transport. And big difference about the US market and here is shopping centre car parks and streets are just physically much bigger over there. But they are a fantastic vehicle. They're a little bit old in terms of the platform. I think they've been around for nearly 10 years with the 5.7 V8, and they love them in the Middle East as well. But the Tacoma's now selling more in the US than the Tundra, which is interesting. So there's this mid-size truck popularity growth in the US where the range has just been released over there. There's the Chevy Colorado is based on a different chassis than ours. Ours comes out of Thailand, but the US one is on a Trailblazer type chassis, so it's physically bigger. Those trucks now are a size down from a Tundra or an F-150 or a Silverado, and the sales of those are absolutely booming. So it's sort of similar to what we see here with the dual cab utes becoming or have become the top selling vehicles. But to answer your question, Tundras are awesome, and we had one. We bought in at left-hand drive. We just recently sold it and did all the supercharger development on that vehicle. So it's fantastic vehicle, but I just don't think many people could live with it in any of the city. But if you were out in the outskirts or the regional areas, it'd be absolutely awesome.
So obviously exports are a big part of the business then for Harrop.
Yeah, more and more so. Like we're an OEM supplier with superchargers. We did Toyota here in Australia with the TRD Orion program. We're We had the Ford program. We supply Lotus cars in the UK with superchargers for their Exige model. And increasingly our aftermarket product is becoming more and more popular overseas. So in the performance segment, Harrop has a pretty strong name, I would suggest, in the Australian market. But outside of Australia, we're working hard to grow our brand and promote, what our values are and our desires with the products that we have and what we're trying to achieve. And that's starting to be well received both in the US and the Middle East and Europe and other areas. But the eLocker product's been a huge product that's grown over the last 7 to 8 years, and that's opened up a lot of opportunities across vehicles that we didn't otherwise have a relationship with car owners or vehicle owners. So that's been a fantastic program for us.
So what is an eLocker? What does it do, and what makes it different to other lockers?
Yeah, that's a really easy one. So an eLocker is a selectable locking diff. So a differential on a vehicle allows the rear wheels or the front wheels, if it's a four-wheel drive vehicle, to turn at different speeds. So the vehicle's able to turn corners, and that's where the differential part comes from. And that's what's known as an open diff. And if you're off-road and you get wheel articulation and unload, a front and a rear wheel or a rear wheel in a rutted type environment, it'll just spin on the side that doesn't have any traction. So with a selectable locker, you engage it by pressing a button or a switch, and it locks the differential, so the torque from the engine gets distributed evenly to both wheels, regardless of whether they're on the ground or off the ground. So they're a great tool for off-roading, extremely popular, and they transform the capability of any vehicle that's got them fitted in terms of where they can navigate safely, with limited traction or grip.
And so what makes the eLocker different then?
Well, the key difference there is it's an electromagnet. It's a 12-volt actuation method, so there's no air lines, there's no compressor, there's no O-rings, which some of the alternatives on the market offer. And I best describe it as there's no OEM programs in the world. There's no vehicles that manufacturers put through durability that offer an air-operated diff lock, because fundamentally they're just not suitable for manufacturers that need to pass 300,000 kilometre durability testing, which is what they do, or more in commercial vehicles. So we partner with Eaton. Eaton's a huge power management company worth many, many billions, based out of the US, and they developed the eLocker technology, I understand, originally for the US military. So that obviously has rigorous durability and longevity testing that has to happen. And then further to that, there's OEMs like GM and Jeep who factory fit eLockers to vehicles that you can buy off the showroom floor. So a great example, the new Colorado in the US, the ZR2, is trying to sort of compete with the Raptor a little bit with fancy suspension, which is really good quality, but it comes supplied with eLockers from the factory, front and rear. So that's a trend that we're certainly seeing. There's more and more OEMs putting certainly the lockers in the back. Like, I don't think you can buy a Ranger here in Australia that doesn't have a factory rear locker already options from the factory. But to really answer that question clearly, it's the actuation method. It's still a selectable locker. When it's activated, it locks the rear axles together so the torque is distributed evenly. However, it's the actuation using an electromagnet, which is unique, unlike the alternatives which use compressed air.
So I didn't know about the reliability. I know I've heard lots of stories about people with air lockers who've had those sort of issues, and it's one of those things where you're trying to sort of find the right tape to try and find the leak, because it can be a little bit annoying when you're out at the campsite.
Well, that's right. We've had plenty of customers give us feedback that they're just delighted with the instant response of actuating the diff or activating the diff to lock with an eLocker, or the issues they've had with air-operated variants where there's a leaky air line out in the trail, and trying to actually seal that. If a wire was to be broken, you could easily patch that on on the trail, and importantly, wires can be routed and protected far more easily in terms of the installation than airlines can be, which have to navigate chassis rails and twists and turns. So that's really the key difference, and Eaton's technology is validated to a military and an OEM level, and it's used by OEMs for vehicles that are sold and optioned that way. So I know Toyota offer, it's not an Eaton in the rear of the Land Cruisers, it's a different brand, but it has a solenoid which actuates the diff. So it's still essentially an electric diff locker, but it doesn't have an electromagnet. It uses a solenoid to actuate the diff lock mechanism.
And so what's the connection between Harrop and Eaton, and are they different lockers?
Well, ours are different in that we've developed a really broad range of lockers. I think we've got over 60 part numbers now, predominantly for the Japanese-based vehicles, which we know are extremely popular here in Australia and most parts of the world. We only use the 4-pinion design. Some of Eaton's earlier lockers were only a 2-pinion, which is the pinion gears are inside the eLocker, and basically having 4 is better than 2 in terms of strength. And Eaton focus mostly on their US market applications, so they've got some of the common US trucks in their own, like Dana, for example. They've got the Dana units in their portfolio, but we're the exclusive licensee to use Eaton's technology to develop a broad range of applications for those really popular vehicles like the Toyotas, Nissans, Mitsubishi, Land Rover, and the list goes on. So that's the relationship where we're a technology and manufacturing partner with Eaton, obviously based here, proudly manufacturing and designing the product in Melbourne, Australia. And we have close relationship with the engineering team in the US, both supercharger, which is the power adder, and the eLocker, which is the traction device.
And how much manufacturing gets done in Australia?
Well, quite a bit. The gears are a net forged gear, but the splines and the machining of the internal, the housing and the caps are all done here in Australia. So the electromagnet and the pinions and the ramp plate is the Eaton components, and each model's a little bit different in terms of the diff. So the diffs operate all in the same way, but the way the OEMs have designed the housing or the internal dimensions is different, and as such, we've got a package, essentially, the eLocker for all of those different models. So a great example is the PX Ranger. The PX3 has just been released, and the front locker is different. We've just released the PX3 front eLocker, and it's slightly different to the PX2, even though a lot of the vehicle hasn't changed, but the front diff did change slightly. So that's a good example of us using our engineering capability to come up with a solution for a new vehicle that arrives.
Well, it's also good that there's still some Australian manufacturing going on, because it's actually pretty hard to manufacture in Australia, and there's very few people who are still doing it.
Yeah, we're extremely proud of the history of the business, but also our capability. And anyone, I'd encourage you to come and have a look through our factory at some point. But we've got a fantastic machine shop and a fantastic engineering team, and we've been doing it for a long time. And differentials they're relatively simple in terms of what they're trying to do, but the tolerances that are involved for them to be, and the materials need to be to a certain specification to have the durability and the OEM level of quality that's required. And given our relationship that we've got with OEMs and our ability to supply them for their programs, we transfer that capability into the aftermarket side of the business, which is far bigger than the OEM business. Most of our business is our Harrop proprietary branded products. And superchargers, for example, the rotating group, we call it, but basically the 2 rotors that go inside the housing that move the air is the part that Eaton supply, and everything around that, the aluminium castings. We have our own foundry over in Adelaide, so we cast our own aluminium castings and machine those here at Harrop. The casting facility, Harrop Casting Technologies, is in Adelaide at a casting precinct in Wingfield, and then our head office here in Preston has the machine shop. So high levels of vertical integration, and that means we can maintain the quality and and the repeatability. We don't do cast iron. The castings for the eLockers and some of the other brake components come, again, locally from a foundry in New South Wales.
Ah, cool. So what's a selectable locker, and when would you use one of those?
Well, a selectable locker, as the name suggests, is simply being able to select when it locks and when it doesn't lock. So there's a switch typically in the dash somewhere or the centre console, and the operator or the driver can see that they're navigating a tricky section of track, or they're in an environment where there's low grip. It might be a boat ramp that's got a whole lot of moss on it, and you can stationary engage the locker, and that will basically lock the rear axles together, so you've got the same amount of drive or torque going to both wheels on that axle. And if you've got lockers front and rear, then you've got the perfect scenario of being able to lock all four wheels together, and they'll turn at the same speed and the same amount of torque going to them, which makes navigating really tricky, technical, rutted out sections or obstacles just a lot easier. You don't have to be as aggressive. You see guys that don't have lockers that need to really attack a track to get momentum. I used to do a lot of dirt biking in my younger days, and on a 125 out in the bush, you'd have to hit things sort of flat out to try and carry enough momentum up a snotty hill climb. And it's no different with four-wheel drives. If you're absolutely on the gas and spinning wheels and jumping all over the place, you're shock loading the drive line, the transmission, the diffs. Whereas with selectable lockers or with lock diffs, you can basically just use low range, and the vehicle will naturally find its grip, and it will pull itself up in almost all situations.
The difference between front and rear lockers then, like most vehicles, if they come with a locker, are going to come with a rear before a front one. Is there a difference in the way, do people have a front locker only, or how does that sort of work?
It mostly comes down to personal preference. So a great example is the Nissan Patrol, which is one of the most popular enthusiast vehicles in our market and in other parts of the world as well. The factory limited slip diff, which is not a locker, but on the road, driving around a wet roundabout, it will transfer torque using clutch packs to the wheel that's got more traction. That's what a limited slip diff does. So a lot of our customers will put a locker, an eLocker, in the front axle of a Patrol, because that gives them the best of both worlds. So driving around town, they've got the LSD doing its thing in the back in two-wheel drive, and then when they're off-road in four-wheel drive and they need that extra traction going up a rutted-out hill, for example, they can engage the front locker and it will pull through. At a motorsport level, so we support a number of top-level teams like the local Winch Challenge Racing. Patrol Doctor runs eLockers front and rear, and that just gives them a completely locked axle in the front and the rear for the ultimate in traction. As I mentioned, the ZR2 Colorado in the States, it's got factory lockers front and rear. Casey Curry in the US runs lockers in his Jeep in the Ultra 4 series, the King of the Hammers. Again, front and rear lockers. So my explanation is front and rear is the ultimate in terms of traction potential and capability off-road. But depending on what the rear axle has from the factory, if it's got an LSD like a Patrol does or some of the Land Cruisers, then we do have a lot of customers that will option the front axle in the first instance. And then if the LSD wears out because it's got clutch packs, they'll often then decide to put an eLocker in the back as well.
Okay, that makes sense. So what sort of models do you make eLockers for, and which are the popular ones?
Unquestionably, Toyota and Nissan Patrol, the Land Cruisers and Hilux. That's the bulk. Toyota's the number one selling make, and the Hilux is the number one selling model in this country, and it's not dissimilar in some other parts of the world as well. And the earlier Hiluxes, for example, the rear axle was the same. The rear axle of a Hilux was the same as the front of like an 80 series Land Cruiser. So there's a particular part number that is the top selling one, and it's that one. So the front of a Land Cruiser 80 series and the rear of a Hilux is our number one selling model. And then there's a whole range of others, like the Ford Range has become a popular model. There's Triton, Navaras, all of the dual cab utes, Suzuki Grand Vitara, Land Rovers, and even some more unusual ones. There was an overseas military contract that we worked on where they had, I think it was called a Hyundai, I think it was called an iLoad here, but it might have had a different model name. But essentially it was the two-wheel drive Hyundai van that they needed to use in a light-duty off-road environment. So we developed an eLocker for the rear axle of that model as well. So it's not uncommon for us to do some more unusual ones. Mitsubishi Canter is a great example. So that's a light sort of truck that's used in some camper van applications. And if you're touring around, having that insurance of being able to lock your axle if you get into a tricky situation can prevent you getting stuck and potentially expensive recovery fees.
Yeah, make a big difference on being able to get out. What's in the pipeline then for eLockers? What's sort of coming out? What are you working on?
We've just released the PX3, so that's a new model that's just arrived. There's a number of other. We're always keeping an eye on what the manufacturers are doing with new models coming to market. So where we see a model that we know is going to be an enthusiast vehicle, we'll do that. The Ranger Raptor, for example, it's a PX3 platform, so we've got the front axle covered off on that model, and we're also always looking to innovate. So there's a number of other developments that we've been prototyping internally. Nothing I can share with the listeners today, but we're constantly trying to improve, I guess, the performance and the capability of all our products, and that's something that we strive towards.
How hard are they to fit? Is this something that someone could install at home, or does it need to be done by someone who knows what they're doing?
I think the short answer there is that someone needs to have experience with setting up a diff, essentially. We have got some customers that have elected to do the wiring themselves. They're pretty handy with the wiring side of things, and they'll remove the third member or the diff housing from the axle assembly, and they'll take that to one of our distributors or to Harrop here in Melbourne or a diff shop and actually have the eLocker set up in the diff with the ring and pinion, the crown wheel and pinion. So it's getting the backlash right, because if you don't get that right, the alignment's not quite right, the wear pattern's going to be noisy, and it could cause all sorts of issues. So it's definitely not a DIY for someone that's a novice or not experienced, but it's that setup of the diff that I would suggest does need specialist capability. We encourage our customers in the inquiries. We've got a range of outlets throughout the country, both with the Opposite Lock network and Terrain Tamer and independent traction dealers, which are all on the website. So getting good advice is always important. It's sort of important to pay once and enjoy quality as opposed to having potential issues, which nobody wants when they're out having fun in the bush. Exactly.
Well, thanks, Heath. I think you've covered off on, what eLockers are. And the thing I like is Harrop's, it's one of those great Aussie engineering stories, with I wasn't aware of how big the export opportunity was.
Yeah, instead of saying, the export market's becoming so much more relevant because of vehicles like the Mustangs that are coming to Australia. The Thai Utes have become the very popular models on the road, with Hilux, the Colorado, the Ranger, and that trend's only going to continue. The car manufacturers, the GMs, Holdens, Fords or Nissans, are looking to get economies of scale. So if they're doing engineering on a vehicle, they want to make that available in Europe as they do potentially in the North Americas, as well as Asia and Australia. So increasingly our efforts are focused on those platforms or those models that are sold everywhere, and we want to service our Australian customers and also expand what we're doing in other markets as well.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thanks, James. Appreciate the opportunity.
No worries. Bye. There you have it. Lots of information. I didn't realise that Harrop manufactured in Australia. I think that's really cool. I didn't know much about all of the other cool things that they do as well. So a really informative chat about, as I said, a really cool Aussie engineering and manufacturing company with some cool technology. That's it. Hopefully I'll see you on the track someday. Bye.
4x4earth.com is used by over 200,000 people every month to find great tracks, organise trips and find out how to better enjoy exploring the great outdoors. There's over 1,000 tracks and 300 campsites ready for you to explore. So check out 4x4earth.com today and sign up to get access to the track information, ask questions, and meet other 4x4 Earthers. Membership is completely free. If you're looking for a good route, check out 4x4earth.com today.